Well, like I promised you last week, things are going to get a lot worse before they get better as we go into the second episode about Margaret Granger, our young girl from Australia who's doing a tremendous job of ministry here. I don't want to give it all away, but you need to watch this episode because what happens here is really a key turning point that I believe that you'll be able to relate to.
A revelation of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ had radically transformed Margaret Granger's life. Her salvation had answered many lingering questions she had had about her purpose in this world. Margaret was beginning a lifelong journey of simple faith in God's promises, and the Lord began to reveal a detailed plan for her life as she continued to seek Him.
I'm sitting in this prayer meeting and I have my eyes closed, but I see myself on South Patio Road, which is one of the major roads leading to the highway with children. And the children have food and they have finances and they have clothing, and they're just rejoicing and praising God as they're dancing down the street. And as they go down the street, the adults come out of their houses and the children evangelize to the adults and tell them about God. And some of the adults repent and they join the procession, but some of the adults don't. And they turn back and go into their houses, and when they close the doors, all the windows and the doors go black.
At the time, Margaret was serving the Lord in a Sunday school at her church. But the vision God had given her was the catalyst for her future ministry. Soon after receiving the vision, Margaret responded to a request to do children's activities at a prison in Pattaya, which proved to be the seeds of a powerfully effective foundation that until today ministers to thousands of children in need across Thailand each year. But as Margaret's ministry exploded, her health came under attack. Puzzling illnesses, coupled with misdiagnoses and inadequate medical care, ravaged Margaret's body until she could no longer ignore the seriousness of her condition.
One thing after another. I had a burst ovarian cyst, which was misdiagnosed. I ended up having to be in Bangkok for that. I just got recovered from that, and I was involved in a poisoning scare along with other people. I wasn't being specifically targeted. There was a general population, but I was one of the 5 that happened to receive it, and because I'd already been sick from the other, the burst ovarian cyst, my system was very weak. And I just didn't take the poisoning very well at all. So I actually ended up in hospital, and they tried lots of different medications. I'd gone through many different surgeries. I had a simple procedure to have some polyps removed, and what happened was that my intestines were so weak that the site of the polyp removal just couldn't heal. And so they tried many different things here in Thailand, and eventually the doctor said, look, we really think you need to go home.
Margaret's dream of seeing at-risk children being cared for and shown the love of God had just begun to take shape. Yet as Margaret flew back to Australia for treatment, she felt confident this would not hinder her for long. Yet almost as soon as she landed, Margaret found herself in the fight of her life.
I got home to Australia, and it was a very uneventful flight, and I'd been home for just a couple of days, and it was Thursday evening of Good Thursday, so I went to the bathroom and I was just hemorrhaging blood from my bowel. So it was internal bleeding, so you can't just apply pressure on it and stitch it up. So my mom and dad, I was staying with my mom and dad, and they called an ambulance, and I had to go to the major district hospital because the local one couldn't cope with the kind of emergency that I had. So I stayed in the hospital, and they transfused me with many, many bags of blood. I think that first night I had 7 bags of transfused blood into me. And then on the Saturday I was relatively well, and then on the Sunday morning it was just like the Red Sea parted again.
Doctors transferred Margaret to a bigger hospital, But even after several blood transfusions, Margaret's brain was not receiving enough blood, and she started to seizure. As the ambulance raced towards the hospital, Margaret flatlined. As medical staff desperately tried to save her, Margaret could feel her life slipping away. In that moment, God's presence entered the ambulance, and he spoke softly to Margaret's heart.
And all of a sudden I hear the nurse, and she's just in a panic, and she's going, I can't get a pulse, I can't get a pulse. And it was just an incredible clarity. And God said, do you believe, even if there wasn't any blood dripping into your veins, that I could sustain your life? And I knew that that was the question, a yes you live, a no you die. I was saved, I wasn't scared of dying. I wasn't thinking about my ministry or anything. And I said, yeah, God, even without that blood, I believe that you could sustain my life. And as soon as I thought that, I couldn't say it with my mouth, as soon as I thought that, the nurse goes, I've got a pulse, I've got a pulse, I've got a pulse.
Margaret's heart began beating once again. The ambulance made it to the hospital in time to wheel her into emergency surgery. Margaret survived, but realized some changes needed to be made if she was to fully recover from her ordeal.
And you know, God healed me, and you know, I had to take some rest. And I'm not very good at taking rest. And so I used that opportunity to reflect on what God had done for me and where I was going. And you know, the devil tried to take my life, but God saved it. But you know, he gave me a choice. Do you want to live or do you want to die? And he would have loved me either way. And I chose life. And God has just given me life abundantly. And so I'm just so thankful to him.
Months of physical attacks had taken their toll on Margaret's health. Many of her friends and family implored her to stay in Australia and take care of herself. Margaret prayed for wisdom. Could she, or should she, return to Thailand?
Thanks for watching Continuum today. You got to make sure you come back next week, because we don't want to leave Margaret with the second episode of her 3-episode series. We want to see this resurrection that's coming up next week. Amazing things that God brings to pass in her life, and I know that it's going to speak to you about not only turning points as we've seen, but now a great destiny that God has in store for every one of us. So next week, more Great Commission action from this side of the Continuum.